Cool. So yeah, I'm Jessy. I'm a senior copywriter at HLK, and I've been there for just over a year. I've been writing professionally for like 13-ish years now, I think. And I didn't actually get my start in advertising agencies. So I started in tech, like in the San Francisco Bay Area on an internal creative team, which is one thing I'm going to talk about during our presentation, which is like things you learn on the job. One of them is like working in creative doesn't always have to mean that you have to go to an agency. So the first like 7 or 8 years of my career, I was in-house at like on the in-house marketing and creative teams at different various companies in Chicago and the Bay Area. I worked in tech, and then I was living in Detroit for a couple of years, and that's when I started working at agencies. So I worked at Huge on a really big auto account because everyone in Detroit works on auto. And then I moved back to St. Louis last summer. I grew up here, but I haven't lived here since high school. So when I moved back, I learned about a little bit more about HLK, and I really wanted to work there. And so interviewed, and that brings us to the present day. Not work related. I also spend a lot of time with my dog. I have like a little wiener dog named Peanut, who came to work with me all the time, and Penny and him are little buddies at the office when we went to the office regularly. And yeah, I'm a cyclist too, so I ride a ton. Yeah, just been spending time with friends, socially responsibly for the most part, and trying to stay sane during all of this craziness.
Awesome. Do you feel like your dogs can't like miss the office? I remember like HLK office culture, like there's a dog for every two people. Like, are your dogs missing their friends?
Penny probably is. Mine isn't.
Peanut's a people person.
Yeah, my dog's kind of a turd. He's like old and a little grumpy, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with dachshunds, but they have attitude problems. So he's kind of a drama queen, and he doesn't even like seeing the other dogs at the office. So his bed is actually like on top of my desk and not on the ground. He like sits on my desk with me. So
and then he'll bark.
Yeah. He just yells at people and dogs as they pass by.
Yeah, Penny misses it. I just moved into an apartment complex recently that has a dog park there, which has been a nice thing for her, because she has some friends that she's made that 4 o'clock hits and we go. She gets to run around a little bit, which has been good for my sanity, because otherwise she just stares at me the entire day while I work.
Awesome. So if we want to dive into the presentation, and then we can just have a cool, fun conversation after.
Sweet.
Great. All right, I can share my sheets. Good. I cannot talk. I can share my screen, Jessy. Okie dokie. I feel like we're pros now at screen sharing. You don't even have to ask if everyone can
ask.
All right, you guys don't see your faces in here in the corner, do you? We're all good? Okay, good. Okay, so we just have a few slides prepared just to kind of, set the ground. I know when we were in school, they didn't really talk about planning a lot, and sometimes it's just nice to hear, because every agency is different, just the gist of our role and what we do. We have this cute little slide we started off with that originally was kind of a joke, but then we're like, we'll keep this in here. But, really planning and creative in general, we have this, like, how would you call it, Jess? It's like a symbiotic relationship. Like planning, we're all about making creatives work better and help set creative up for success. And
yeah, the planners are really like the benchmark for us. So all the work that they do allows us to then take that and run with it and like come up with something really smart that delivers like what the client wants. But we can't do our job until they do theirs, basically. So we have to work really closely together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a lot of it's just like an ongoing dialogue and collaboration that we have together. Like we'll get into this process in a little bit, but we'll work on it. And it's always nice for the creatives to say, this really didn't hit the mark. This really didn't make sense to me. And then we'll go back and we'll refine and come back, and then they'll go take it and do something beautiful and great with it. But So really how we've outlined this really brief presentation. First, we'll just talk about the gist of what Jess and I do at HLK, just our day-to-day. We'll talk about creative briefs and how we approach them. Maybe every agency has their different creative brief. Everyone has their own briefing process. There's no right or wrong way, but what's helpful is just hearing all of the different ways that you could approach a creative brief, and you can typically just take bits and pieces from what you like and create your own. And then we'll go into what we learned just by doing the job, things that no one really tells you in school, and then we'll open it up to whatever questions you guys have for us. All right. So planning, really an overall planning, sometimes we're called account planners, sometimes we're called brand planners, sometimes we're strategists. So lots of different names for us out there. I think planning just is the most basic because it includes strategy, but strategy isn't all that we do. So sometimes strategists can feel more limiting in what we do. So our overview gist of how I would describe our planner elevator pitch is really, at the end of the day, we're that one voice for our client's target audience. We have to know their mindset and needs. We have to know the context in which they're interacting with their clients and how that impacts their beliefs and their behaviors, because that's what helps us understand, the baseline. This is what they think, and if we need them, if we want to achieve XYZ for the client, we need to shift their mindset to this, and this is how we're going to do that. So it's really about translating those human insight and cultural insights into problems, like people problems. So how I have that written on the slide is much better, but we translate research to insights. We also translate brand problems to people problems. So oftentimes a client will come to us with a brand objective, like we want to increase market share by X% and be the leading laundry detergent brand, in the US. So what is that? How do we achieve that? You don't achieve that from the brand perspective. You achieve that from the consumer perspective of who's using their products. And really, once you nail that down, that's how you create focus and inspiration for the creative work, which comes through in the brief. So as far as our day-to-day, this is a cliche, but really no day is the same. I think that's really advertising agencies in general. You just have such a wide variety of clients and wide variety of projects to where it never feels the same. But really my big thing is we're in charge of staying on top of the cultural trends, industry trends for our clients, audience or consumer trends. That helps us be in a position where we can identify opportunities. We can help them kind of push the thinking further if they're maybe a little too narrowly focused, because they're so close to the work they do. They need that outside voice to say, have you thought about this, or have you thought about XYZ? We develop the creative briefs and run the kickoffs alongside the account team. We also attend internal reviews, and we work really closely in that collaboration with the creative team. And at the end of the day, a lot of the work we do, because it's based in that research and that insight, it helps sell in our ideas. So really, when you have a really tight strategy, the work, it sells easily because you have all this rationale that you've already established. It just makes it easier at the end of the day, and the clients are nodding along with you versus having to kind of backtrack and explain why this approach is the best approach. Anything to add to that, Jessy?
No, and sorry, I got kicked off for a second, so I missed probably a minute.
I heard a splash. I figured that with you. I was like, oh no.
Yeah, I was like, my internet just crapped out. So hopefully it'll be fine now.
I was just going to say chime in with questions if you guys have them, but.
Yeah, feel free to interrupt us if you're curious about anything. Mm-hmm. Okay, so copywriting is obviously part of the creative team, and creatives essentially are like the big idea people, which planners are too, but once we get like some guidance from them, like I said earlier, then we can like start running with that guidance and come up with like some great concepts. So we ideate and come up with creative solutions to accomplish like what the clients need help with, basically. We take briefs from the account team and the planners and turn them into campaigns, like everything from user experience and user interface, copywriting, art direction, motion design, production, like video people. All of those roles fall under the creative team. At most places, I would say, not all agencies have all of those capabilities in the same place, but HLK is kind of special in that way that we do. But at the end of the day, basically our job is to make things look good and sound good. So they'll sell into the client and the client will then have it sell into their customers. So on a daily basis, before tonight, this right side just said no 2 days are the same, because they really aren't. But basically day to day, we spend a lot of time in meetings. We spend a lot of time brainstorming by ourselves with each other. From a copywriting perspective, like I work most closely with an art director. At some agencies, you're a team, and some agencies have art director, copywriter teams. And when I went to school, I went to undergrad for journalism and business, and that's how I ended up in the advertising and marketing world. But I also went to a Chicago portfolio school for a year, which some of you may be familiar with, after I went through undergrad. So in portfolio school, we were partnered, and a lot of places do it that way. A lot of places don't do it that way. HLK, we don't do like art director, copywriter partners. And I think that allows for more flexibility with the type of stuff you're working on and who you're working with. So I actually prefer it that way. When you're partnered, you're like really locked into stuff, and sometimes that can get a little stale. But basically, depending on what clients or what types of projects you're working on, writers work with another art director, and the two of you are responsible for, with a creative director above you, are responsible for like coming up with ideas that answer the brief. So the brief presents this problem to solve, right? So copywriting marries problem solving with language, which allows for a lot of flexibility and a lot of like evolvement over time. So meetings, brainstorming, concepting are the same thing. Spend a lot of time doing that. And then honestly, most of my time I spend writing and tweaking stuff that I already wrote. So like I right now work on like all different types of media. So I write TV scripts, storyboards for TV commercials, radio scripts. I work on websites. So I do a lot of like landing pages and digital advertising. We do print. We do direct mail, which is also another form of print. And what else did I miss? RFP type stuff. Should I talk about that at all?
Yeah, you can. I think that's such an interest. That's like such a big part of it that you don't really.
Okay. So another thing that almost everyone at the agency touches at some point is an RFP is called a request, or it stands for request for proposal. So that's basically us proving what we're capable of to try to win the business of whatever company we're trying to win the business of. So for instance, Jenna probably knows Emo's Pizza. Emo's is like a really famous pizza place in St. Louis. Several months ago now, like at the very, very beginning of quarantine, that's like an example of a business that we were engaging with. Agencies go through RFPs all the time. Some really big ones, some smaller ones, depends on the type of business you're trying to win. But essentially, this is a really long way of saying that a big part of what we also do is winning new business. And so that is, we don't have the client yet and they're not paying us yet, but we need to like show them what we're capable of. And so we spend a lot of time working with the planners and working with creative directors and the media team and everybody else at the agency who has a role in putting our best foot forward and trying to bring business into the agency. So that is one of the things I want to talk about you do not learn in school is that type of work. Because when you go through like a marketing program or business marketing or journalism, which is what I went through, or advertising school, you don't really learn that like those are also the types of things you're working on. It's not just like you have a client and you do work for them and that's it. There's a lot of creative thinking and a lot of creative work that goes into being at an ad agency that sometimes doesn't even see the light of day, but it's still like a really important part of your job. So just want to stress that too.
Yeah, and the thing with RFPs is it's usually the same type of process that you would take with any campaign, but it's like squished over or usually a shorter, much shorter period of time. So
Yeah.
it is a juggle of balancing the regular client work that you have going on, the projects that are already forecasted for the rest of the year, while also squishing in these RFPs in between. So it makes for an interesting cadence. Like you'll have really, really busy days, really, really busy weeks, followed by, you know, a little bit more balance in your workflow. And it's nice. I like it.
Yeah.
It's just keeps it interesting.
And I think there's something to be said about when there are those really busy times and you like maybe have to work at night or on the weekend or whatever, you have to come in on the weekend, which does happen every once in a while. It's just nice to remember like there's also times where like it's very chill. So like that's just kind of the nature of advertising in general, is like it ebbs and flows, and there's really busy periods and there's slower times, and depending on your clients, I mean, that could change at any time. It just kind of depends on what type of clients you're working on. So a lot of stuff we work on has like more seasonal things. So like a lot of the agriculture business we do, they're all planning at the same time. So usually like during planning period, we're all really, really busy, and then it kind of like tapers off. So that's another thing you just kind of learn on the job. But
yeah.
And then the other thing we do every single day is talk on Slack about our dogs. So
yeah.
Just want to stress that we spend a lot of time doing that too.
Jess and I probably spend like a higher proportion on that channel than others. So then we'll talk quickly just about how we at HLK approach creative briefs. Might give you guys a few tools in your toolkit for when you're working on different campaigns, whether it's a capstone class or is it called I used to be a part of this, and the NSAC, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Or the ad competition.
Yeah.
Perfect. Oh gosh, I'm getting woo, don't look. Okay. So really the creative brief, this is a oversimplification of what it is, but its purpose is it's a roadmap for the entire team. And it even helps at the end of the day, look back and evaluate the work against, because our work is subjective. A lot of time, even planning, it can feel very subjective. So knowing how do I evaluate the work in a way that is going to achieve what we want to achieve, and it takes the bias out of the work and it makes it about the audience and the client. So that there's this little saying that it's a roadmap. If you can't give directions, people will get lost or they'll make up their own map. So as far as this provides focus for what the problem to solve is, you know, some guardrails for how to solve it. But what's important about this map that you give, you don't tell them exactly where to go. It's not like you're telling them exactly what to do. You're giving them like the sense of direction, and you're giving them like a box to play in to where they feel the creative team's inspired, but they have the focus and direction, and they know what they're doing, and they have it really sets them up for as much success as possible. So if you give someone this big, like in any aspect of life, like a really broad, vague ask, you can't really do anything with that. So
yeah, we call it the sandbox.
Yeah, I love that.
You need to give us a big enough sandbox to play in, but put guardrails on the outside so we know where not to go.
Mm-hmm. So just another summary of really how we use creative briefs. It's a catalyst for problem solving. It brings everyone together in the creative process. It's a collaborative thing. The planner takes the lead in writing this brief, but the account person has a say, the creative director weighs in. And then so that way when it goes to the team, everyone's aligned. It's been worked on together, and it's supposed to inspire and set people up for success. This is our brief template, but it's always changing. Our planning team, we're also looking and continually talking to each other about what's worked, what hasn't worked. We want to update this brief regularly so that it's a tool that we can use, but at the same time, we often break this template frequently based on the challenge and what makes the most sense. Trying to think. I felt like I had another point to say and I can't remember what it was, but Jess, anything else you'd add to the purpose?
No, I would just say that like briefs look different everywhere you work. So that there is no standard really. And you guys probably have them in some of the work that you're doing or learning about them, but they really are very different from place to place. So this is just from our place where we work now, and what works for us. And some agencies are really good with briefs and some are like notoriously bad. And something that you just, it's really important to have good briefs, which is why we are focusing on this, because they really are like the one source of truth for every, like all of the creative work that comes from the client, like the client problem that we're trying to solve for them or help them with. Like the brief is like the starting point. And so if you start with a shitty foundation, you're going to have shitty creative work. So there, it's really important to have like strong briefs and like smart, thoughtful briefs and not just a half-assed thing that somebody threw together. And so that's why there's like all of this thinking in the upfront to make sure that those briefs are like bulletproof. So then they can hand it off to the creative team and we can like go do our thing.
Yeah, I think a common mistake people make with briefs is you think of it as a form to fill out that you can sit down and just like knock it out in an hour. But this takes time and attention, and it takes starting it and stopping it, because really, while you're developing this brief, what you're actually doing is you're developing the strategy behind the campaign. You're making decisions on who your audience is and what you're solving for in their lives. That problem to solve, I would say, no matter what template, what type of brief, what it is, good briefs, they always have that focus. Here's what we're solving for. And it's not about market share and it's not about, oh, brand awareness. It's about their audience and what tension the brand is solving in their life that makes the brand more meaningful to them in their lives. So we have more on good briefs and bad briefs, kind of segued into that.
Yes. Yeah. And like I said, I mean, and the creative team isn't responsible for like writing the brief, but because we have to work off of it, it seems like, oh, well, you know, maybe you don't care because you're a writer, you're an art director, designer, like you don't have to worry about the brief till you get it. But it is important to like ask these questions in the upfront so you have everything you need to do your job, basically. But good briefs set up brand problems that are transferred into people problems, which Jenny was talking about earlier. They give you one problem to solve. They're inspirational. They help the creative team really get into like the mindset of the customer, and they have the right box, the right sandbox of information that we need. Not too much and not too little, just like the essentials and some inspiration. Less than ideal briefs talk about problems that clients are having, which this is like a really common thing that happens, right? Because it's our job to like answer the client, to solve these clients' problems. And so it's easy to only think in that way. We're like, well, the clients are having this problem, so this is how we're going to approach it, when really it should be about their customers. Mm-hmm. Obviously, like a brief with tons of challenges to solve is not going to be very clear, and it's not going to give us clear direction on what we need to actually do, and so that could cause confusion. Language, buzzwords, jargon, creatives hate seeing that, so we try to avoid those as much as possible. And just overwriting a brief is a really common thing that happens too, and it happens, and it's understandable why it happens, but really good briefs are succinct and have very clear direction.
Yeah, I think it's normal when you kick off a team, you're going to have that urge at first to tell them everything you know, but it takes time and it takes a lot of thought to say, okay, I don't need to tell them everything I know. I just need to tell them what they need to know. What are the important things that is going to be vital to the success of this project, and only narrow it down to that. Usually start a brief, take time away from it, and then cut from that brief. Because again, if you feel like it's telling you multiple things, it should feel like one simple message as you read it from each aspect of the brief. It almost takes you through, it starts and then it builds from the first point, and then it builds and it builds, and there's that one thread or narrative that goes throughout. And that's when you know you have a really tight brief. We have an example. This is kind of it's an agriculture, but we all love, I mean, sweet corn is pretty tasty. So we thought that would be fun to walk you through.
Here's an example of not all advertising is sexy. Some of it is. Sometimes you're writing about corn, and that is a reality of the business. But if you're a good creative, you can make it really fun and make it really smart. You can make anything really fun and really smart. So this is like a nice example of one that's like, when you're in school, that's probably not like a client you would get. I know I didn't get clients like the real clients I work on now. When we were in school, we're like, oh, we're going to do a campaign for Doritos and like 7-Up. And that's not always reality. Like, you're not always going to be working on those huge, huge, huge multi-million-dollar accounts. So this is also why we chose like a more realistic client.
Yeah, and I think it's actually, I enjoy, like, in agriculture, I have some biotech clients, and construction. I work in a lot of the construction industry, and it's more interesting to really immerse yourself in those person's shoes and kind of think about somebody different versus, most of us eat Tostitos and appealing to the masses a lot of times. But
yeah, and also from a creative perspective, like it only helps you be a better creative when you're forced to put yourself in someone's shoes who you're completely not the target audience. So just something to keep in mind as you're like working through this kind of stuff is like, it's good for you to be made uncomfortable because you have no idea what the life of a soybean farmer is, for example.
So this client, a little background, it's with Bayer. The Seminis is their sweet corn line that you eat. Well, obviously you eat, but they also make some corn that you don't eat for, livestock feed and other uses. So here was their problem that they presented to us. They wanted to increase online sales of the Seminis Performance Series sweet corn among row crop farmers, which is a slight nuance. Row crop farmers are the farmers that grow corn and soy and cotton not to eat. So they're selling it. Jess, you can probably, I know you're on crop science. I'm not on crop science anymore. Is it mainly, it's for feed, right? Or
yeah, it's to feed the animals that then feed people, basically.
Yeah, which is so much of our corn.
Big market, yeah.
Yeah. So these row crop farmers are not making a profit off their sweet corn. They grow usually a few rows and then they'll sell it on the street. They'll enjoy it with their family. That's just like an important market for them. And we work directly with a retailer where they can just buy their seed online. They don't even have to go somewhere. But so we dug into, okay, what are row crop farmers really worried about during this time of year? What's their attitude towards sweet corn? So that helped us decide on the audience problem, which was during February through June. That's the start and even to the mid part of their season. 100% of their focus is on their business and everything that's going to set them up for success. So they're poring over the decisions they have to make in regards to the seed that isn't sweet corn, doing everything they can so that they start on the right foot and have the most successful harvest possible. So when you're so focused on business, it's hard to squeeze in the things you love for pleasure, for leisure, just for enjoyment. Sweet corn's not a priority to them at this time. So how we frame the desired change in mindset is we want them to think sweet corn's not a priority, shifting that to it's not an added task on my to-do list. It fits seamlessly into what I'm already doing. It's not another thing I have to do, therefore I can do this. And how we challenge the creative team with the little creative spark, or sometimes they're called a creative proposition, is prove to these row crop farmers that it's minimal work for maximum enjoyment. And this was the campaign, or just this little piece of creative that came out of it. It's a little banner ad. We wanted to keep it pretty short and sweet, but it reads, Performance Series Sweet Corn sees the season with Simply Grown, Thoroughly Enjoyed. So Simply Grown, Thoroughly Enjoyed became the line that came out of this campaign, and it's kind of the thread throughout. And this was a simple brief to talk through, and I think it shows how the brief does inspire the creative. They actually came up with 3 other approaches in addition to this one that were still on brief, but different nuances and different ways to take it. And it's really cool. This one was my favorite, which is why I dropped it in. And then they also have a little write-up. Jess, do you want to read this one?
Sure.
I can
So this concept offers minimalist design cues, leaning on clarity and simplicity. Messaging focus on the juxtaposition between the enticing ease of growing and the sweet fullness of flavor that's loved by many. White space reinforces the possibilities afforded by the downtime that gives growers the opportunity to do something big for their own table without a big lift. And here is another example of work that copywriters do that doesn't ever necessarily see the light of day as far as media goes, but this is something that was like presented to the client, and it was part of a deck of creative and all this forward thinking from the planners. So writers are also doing this on a pretty regular basis. We're writing the copy that's, you know, in these briefs that we're like then going to present clients to try to sell in work. So this paragraph wouldn't go out onto the internet, but like it's something that we're responsible for coming up with that goes to clients.
Yeah, it's like the spirit behind the campaign.
Yeah. The essence, if you will.
The essence. I like that. So those are all the slides we had shared. We were just going to kind of talk about things we learned on the job and open it up for whatever questions you guys have.
Thank you so much for that. That was so amazing just to see the entire process and an actual example. So thank you.
Yeah.
Mom, you want to start it off with a question? You want me to go ahead?
Yeah, I have a bunch of questions, but I guess I can just start with one. This one's more of like a copywriting question. You were talking about how you were working on like scripts and other mediums, but as like a senior, I was just wondering if you had any tips for like practicing. Because okay, so I think about copywriting as like a muscle, right? You have to practice. So I was just wondering if you had any tips for like honing in your own voice in a time like this for someone like me who's like not working at an agency. Like what could I do to get better at copywriting?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my answer to this always is read. Reading is so important for writers. I think that, and reading stuff you might not always like reach for. Like a couple years ago, I started getting really into comics, which is like not on brand for me, or it wasn't back then. And like things like that, and seeing how other writers do things creatively, I think will really help you like broaden your perspective as far as copywriting goes. So reading, I think, is a really big thing. Just read everything you can. Read the internet, read books, comics, whatever, wherever you find yourself, blogs even. I think that helps you stay sharp. And it just helps you think about, you see one little thing and then you are inspired when you're doing something completely different, but then you can reference back to like something you read in a comic book. So I would definitely say reading. I also, I try to find like other writers that I think are doing cool things. And after working for a while, it's like people I already know that I've worked with or whatever. But like I don't work on the same clients as a lot of the other writers at my agency. And I always love to see like what they're doing, because that just helps me stay like inspired and see like their thought process and how they're working through different problems. So yeah, I would say like ask your friends what they're writing, read what they're writing, try to find like writers' styles that you like and see what they're doing. And then just like, I would always, if you have time, if time allows, which it doesn't always, but write for fun. Like I published a children's book earlier this year, and that was something I had always wanted to do. And it took me like 3 years to actually make it happen, but I was just writing for fun. And then I was like, you know what, I really want to like make this a real thing. So try to like make writing for fun part of your like regular routine. So it's not just your job, it's like not just the writing you're doing for work. I think for a writer, writing for fun is like really important, even if it's just like journaling, it's just for yourself. So I would say those are my biggest three things.
Thank you so much. Sorry, my roommate.
Yeah.
We can't.
Oh, it's fine.
That
I've
was
got some
honestly,
friend here too. It's totally fine.
perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
So I have a big smart question, but to backtrack first, what is this children's book? Can you tell us a little bit more if you don't mind? We love
Oh,
the project.
yeah, it's I can share the link with Jenna and she can share it with you guys if you're interested, but it's called Don't Water the Plant. And it is basically about like the importance of only giving your energy to things that like make you feel good and help you grow.
Very cool. Jenna will definitely have to share that with all of us.
I think I saw it's on Amazon Prime. I think I saw the
Yeah, it's on all the major retailers now.
Everybody get your weekend reading.
Sometimes I need
Oh, so
No, I was just saying sometimes I need a children's book. I need that like joy in my life.
Yeah, well, it has like a nice message for people of all ages. So it's for kids, but like I think the best children's books are the ones that are really written for the adults. And so that's how I try to read it.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, kind of backtracking again a little bit. You both talked a lot about collaboration and how necessary it is to have a really good final product and just working with your teams. How has that changed now that you can't actually be in the same room as the people you're collaborating with?
That's a great question and something that literally everybody on earth is dealing with. It's been hard for us. I think it's been hard. It's tough for creatives because like we literally go into a room and just like start throwing stuff up on a whiteboard. I'm sure planners, I'm sure you guys do that too. It's been difficult, but just like over communicating and really like carving out time to like sit on a call together and just ideate and like really spend time trying to think through things together, because it is hard not being in the same room as far as like concepting goes. When 2 or 3 people are responsible for coming up with ideas and none of us can like pick up on the other's body language, or it's just it has changed a lot. But yeah, I think it just requires more time now.
Mm-hmm. It's really easy to just disconnect in this world. So, I mean, thankfully the planning team, we have 2 meetings a week now. We have a planning meeting where we share work and we work through problems together. That's always set on the calendar. And then we have a happy hour where we just talk about not work, but we then usually end up tackling some type of planning challenge. But to Jess's sentiment, it's also knowing when you're slacking back and forth, when to just pick up the phone and call them and talk it through and having that time. But it's also been nice on the other side to really have the space to think things through. I think it's like, I feel like my briefs have been a lot stronger just because I don't have the distractions, but at the same time, I do miss the afterwards, the collaboration and getting into a room and brainstorming together.
Yeah, and one thing also, and this is just something we decided as the team that I work on, but we amongst ourselves agreed that we would turn our cameras on during meetings, which has honestly helped a lot because we're a little bit more engaged. We're not looking at our phones or whatever, or not doing other work or trying to multitask, which everybody does, and that's really common. But we try to be like really present in our, like anytime we're concepting or trying to brainstorm or come up with something together, like we all just like agreed that we would like just be doing that and turn our cameras on and like mute everything else. And that's helped because not everybody was doing that at first. And we don't do it for every single meeting, but I think that makes a really big difference. So it's just one small weird tip.
Yeah.
Jess, as your kind of creative process goes, so like you get the brief and then like what's step 2, like right after that? Like what does that look like?
So part of the brief is a timeline, and creatives are really deadline driven. So if we don't have a deadline, we won't finish anything ever. Yeah, I see Miles snapping. That's pretty common. So based on the timeline, we'll have a certain amount of time to start coming up with ideas, and then putting copy to design. Usually part of that timeline is an internal review. So for instance, Jenny and I are working on a brand book right now, which is basically putting together like a bunch of guidelines for one of our clients, color palettes, how to use your logo, voice and tone guidance, things like that. We just kicked off a couple days ago, and now the art director that works on that, her and I have a certain amount of time to start talking about how we want to lay it out. How many pages should it be? And Jenny, part of the brief, there was an outline. So now the art director and I are going through the outline and like building out each piece of that. So long story short, you get the brief and then you go off as the creative team, whoever's working on it, the writer and the art director, or sometimes it's multiple writers and art directors and a creative director. Sometimes it's a writer and a creative director. It just kind of depends on the project and the size of the project. But you have a certain amount of time to like start coming up with stuff, and then you make the stuff. And sometimes you, like a lot of times for bigger projects like a television commercial or a radio spot or a website or bigger things, you come up with several concepts, usually 3, and you then present them to the internal team. So the account person who's the liaison between your agency and the client. And then usually the planners are in that meeting, your creative director's in that meeting, and you present your work as you would present it to the client. You get internal feedback from the account team. Maybe you missed the mark a little bit. You got to go back and adjust some headlines or adjust some of the photography or whatever it is. And then you have another round where you get to make those edits before you then present to the client.
Mhm.
So that's typically how the process goes. It's like you get the brief, you have time to ideate, you present internally, whatever it is you're presenting, like any of those media things, website, commercial, scripts, whatever. Even if it's just a banner ad, usually the process goes similarly, or a batch of social media content for a client. And then you have time to finesse it and make it better, and then present to client. And then usually after it goes through the first client review, then you have another round of sort of that same process before it becomes like finalized. That's usually how it goes.
Yeah, and then I think a good point that Jessy made is like the planners too. It's not like we kick them off and then we're off of it. Like we stay so engaged in helping them, push the work further, make sure it's on brief.
Yeah. They're always kind of like making sure we're hitting the mark along the way.
Yeah, and if sometimes they'll come back and they just, need to talk things through, or maybe I'll go pull like inspiration. I'll go look into something and send like, here's a similar example of what we're doing, but not in this industry, like a completely different industry, and kind of give them some fodder to work with.
Yeah.
I have another question if time allows, but this also ties in. So me and Patrick we're a pair of copywriters working for this startup for Allen Hall Advertising, which is just like an in-house ad agency at University of Oregon. And after the first client meeting, the strategists were talking about how the guy who's running it kind of has like his own clear vision of how the brand wants to sound and stuff. So I was wondering, how do you blend your own creative voice with like your clients' wants and like what they like?
Yeah.
Obviously the brand voice is important, but how do you blend your own style into that?
Johnny and I are laughing because this is like a classic challenge, right? It's like they hire you to make and do the thing, but they have their own idea of what they want the thing to be. But then they're hiring experts to do and make the thing that they want. So this is like a very, very, very common thing that happens in advertising. It's like this dance between pleasing the clients and giving them what they want and what they think they want with what you think is really smart and strong. And one of the things I was going to say that you don't necessarily learn on the job is that like every writer has their own voice, right? Like the way you would write for yourself or write an Instagram caption or whatever you're doing that's like your own personality. There's always like a little flavor of that will carry over into your work because that's how it works, right? It's like this is your perspective and you see things a certain way and that's how you write. But over time, you sort of just learn on the job how to merge that with the client needs. Is agriculture a client I ever in a million years thought I would be working on? No. Do I love it? Yes. It has been like the most surprising thing for me because when I left the Midwest, I didn't come back for like 18 years, right? Like I grew up in Missouri and I left and I went to the West Coast and I was in California and I was in Chicago. Well, Chicago's the Midwest, but it's much bigger than St. Louis. But long story short is like, that's just like one of those things where you learn the brand really well and you find ways to like weave your sort of vibe into it, but it's a really delicate balance because there's always an opportunity to make something smarter and there's always an opportunity to make something stronger just based on like your own thinking. But at the end of the day, like the client's paying you, right? The client's paying your agency to make them something that's like on brand for them. And so sometimes you have to decide like, is this a hill worth dying on? Or do I just like let them have this one and do what they want? And a big part of an account manager's job is managing that balance, which like Jenny and I aren't account managers, but the account people are responsible for being the liaison between the agency and the clients and keeping the clients happy and making sure that the creative team is doing good work and smart work that pushes the brand forward while also like making the client happy. So again, it's like this delicate dance, but there is always an opportunity to like use your voice and in your writing, but it's not always going to go the way you want it to. And that's like something you don't learn in school. And sometimes you just have to accept that like sometimes the client, what they say goes, and sometimes they're going to take your work and they're going to rewrite it and it's going to sound like shit. And that's what's going to go out onto the radio. And like that happens sometimes. It doesn't happen a lot, but like those are realities of working in this industry is like, they're the ones paying the bills, right? Like they're the ones hiring you to do the work. So like at the end of the day, if they're not happy, then you haven't done your job well.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that like that's this type of challenge to where maybe the client's pushing a certain direction based on like what they want versus maybe the creative team wants to push a certain voice or tone. A planner can then be used, like that's when we can come in handy to where we can help persuade with strong rationale and research on this is actually the direction because this is what your audience needs, or here's like our point of view, and then that will help sometimes shift. And you know, because our job as planners is also to remove barriers for the creative team. If there's a barrier in the way, we can help remove that, as well as the account person, just depending on the nature of the challenge.
Right. And planners also are really wonderful at reining the creative team in. So like if we start running with an idea and we're like, oh, we want to make this microsite and it's going to be interactive and it's going to be crazy, and the planners can be like, we need to rein this in. So like, you know, creatives love to like have these huge ideas and the planners like bring us back down to earth.
That's true.
Thank you.
And then we get our heads done with you.
I have a question like for you, Jenny, specifically, like as work is picking up in agencies again, how do you feel like consumer trends and consumer behavior is being shifted by COVID, and how you're seeing that in like briefs without like talking about it? I don't know. I feel like I'm working on some campaigns where they don't want us to talk about COVID, but obviously that's what everyone's talking about. So how you can see those shifts like throughout your briefs and like just the culture right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it depends, because some of the, like, we've been doing a lot of like branding work where we're rebranding and it's for the long term, and COVID's an impact. And I think it depends on the industry to be like, is this a permanent impact or is this a temporary impact? So you always have to have your eye on like short term versus long term. So that's been something I've been juggling a little bit more in my brief writing. It's like, is COVID just a now thing? Is this campaign a now thing where I weave this in, or is it like a long-term ongoing brand thing that is more than COVID? Work on a few clients I work on the run at convenience stores. So there's been a big shift in one of their big goals is selling their fresh made food. They want to be like Quick Trip essentially in St. Louis, where they have, you know, Cobb salads and pulled pork sandwiches, and they want to really boost sales. And that's taking a hit because people aren't wanting to go into convenience stores. They're usually just getting your gas. There's something about getting gas these days that's just like extra icky. If you're going and buying food out, you're driving through, you're not going in. You're not really grabbing food on the go anymore. So we've had to kind of rethink in that situation. Okay, so what is the context of what's going on around the audience and their goals? And how do we shift that? Like maybe we rethink altogether how we're going to approach food. Maybe we focus on other things like car washes or things like that. So I kind of rambled at you, but.
No, that was so helpful. That's definitely super interesting, like insight for how culture is like shifting in the now, but also in the future.
Yeah, COVID has 100% affected every single one of our clients. So all of us have had to adjust. I mean, something I was working on for literally 8 months, like a huge product launch, became a 100% virtual event, which was like, we've never had to do anything like that before, right? Like in my entire career, I've never had to adjust for something like that. So I think it's like a learning curve for our clients and for us. And a lot of that has been like a collaboration thing where it actually has been really good for client relations because we're really thinking outside of the box. Like, how can we help them solve this when like nobody knows what the F is going on, you know? And so I think it's been a challenge for us to like prove to our clients that we can still help them solve these problems during like this really unprecedented situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that reminded me, like a lot of our clients with the switch to virtual, they want to treat it exactly the same. Like we're going to take this in-person thing and replicate it on virtual, but really like the value that you get from a virtual event versus in-person event is completely different. So it's not about making a replacement, but kind of
just making like the best recommendation for what we are able to do. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. We probably only have time for one more question. So we always love to end it with just asking for any advice you have for us as seniors and juniors and just, you know, advertising professionals in the future, but also just people, just any personal or work advice you have for us.
Yeah. Do you want to go first? You look like you're thinking. I have a couple things.
I'm thinking. You go first.
I'll go first. So my biggest advice is network as much as possible. Don't be afraid to reach out to people on LinkedIn. Don't be afraid to reach out to people that went to your college and are now working in advertising. Advertising is such a people business that like sometimes you only have to find one person and then you can just like get your foot in the door. Network as much as possible. Like you guys take our contact information, save it. Like I think that's something that when I was in college, I was like so scared to reach out to people because like it's so intimidating, and just I would say like it is scary and it is intimidating, but just do it. Most people who work in creative and planning, I would say, are more than willing to talk to people coming out of school. And there's a lot of us that like really enjoy mentoring and things like that. So network as much as you can, because that's like how you're going to get your job. Applying blindly online and then like not following up to jobs is like, we get so many applications. Like you have to find a way to like break through that as you're like graduating and starting to like begin your career. We get hundreds of applications, and all agencies get hundreds of applications for one job posting. So like knowing somebody is going to help you a lot. Or a really strong portfolio with a really creative cover letter. Even if you're not in creative, like if you want to be a planner or an account person, like make sure your cover letter is not basic. Like those are the things that will get you noticed when you're starting to look for jobs. I know like when I got my first job out of college in advertising, well, marketing on a creative team, I should say, because one of the titles on my resume said mushroom slinger, because I like had worked at the farmers market in Chicago. So like any way you can like help yourself stand out from like a sea of applicants, that is my best advice. Because as we're combing through all these resumes and like applications that are coming through, if they all look the same, like, you know, it's like moving on to the next. So really like try to like sell yourself in a unique way and network as much as possible.
Yeah, it's a good point on the portfolio. I feel like we're seeing more planners having more portfolios, which when I was going through finding a job, that wasn't a thing. You didn't have to have a portfolio unless you were creative, but I think that's shifting. But I saw some really strong planner applied, and she set up she had a website, which I don't think a website necessarily, it just depends. But if you can set up and show someone that you understand how to take a brand challenge, apply it with like an audience insight and turn it into a problem you're solving, and then show the creative that came from that, that shows that you can synthesize and really translate, you know, brain problem to people problem, which is really impressive coming out of school, because that just takes time. But my advice, so when I was looking for planning jobs, there's not a lot of planning jobs in St. Louis. I think they're becoming more and more, but I knew what I wanted to do. And it's okay if you don't know exactly what you want to do. It's okay to be unsure if you want to do social or copywriting. There's a difference between having an open mind and having a passion for it and just being kind of wishy-washy. You can tell people who'll just take any job versus people who kind of want to dip their toes in a few things and see, and you'll get there. The more jobs you get, you'll say, well, I know I don't want to do that, so on to the next thing. So
internships are really good for that too.
Yeah, really good for that.
Great for learning like what you don't want to do.
Yeah, I would say that. And you, it's also good to kind of see if you fit in that company as much as they're trying to see if you fit there. But when I was applying for jobs, I was honest with them. I said, look, I'm ultimately looking for a research planning experience. I'm applying for a project management position, which I would have been the worst project manager ever. So I laugh at that. But, you know, we were able to have a dialogue with some of these smaller agencies to see if it would be possible, if over time I'd be able to work into that. And it's okay to say what you want. I think they want you to tell them what experiences you're looking for. And it shows that you have a point of view and you have passion for what you do.
Yeah.
All right, we have a kind of a small elite group here, but if anyone wanted to reach out, how would you recommend them reaching out to you?
Yeah, for sure. I'm more than happy to share my info with Jenna, I assume is the liaison here. I can send you my stuff. You guys can reach out on LinkedIn. I'll give you my email. And like I said, like if you're doing creative work and you're building your book and your resume and stuff, and you need somebody who's worked in the industry for a long time to be like, hey, is this acceptable if I start applying to jobs? Like, I'm more than happy to make myself available to like just give you ideas or look over stuff. Like, and art directors or designers, like I can put you in touch with other people who aren't writers. Just, yeah, don't be afraid to reach out to people, because that's like how you start building relationships, and advertising and marketing is all about relationships. So I hope that's helpful.
That's about time. Thanks for coming in. I thought it was super informative.
Good.
I'm sure everyone else did.
Yeah, and like I said, if you guys have follow-up questions, I know we're running out of time, but you can email us and we will respond.
Thank you so much.
All right.
And I don't know about y'all, I'm about to have a big bowl of corn now. Now I'm thinking about corn.
Excellent. We love to hear it.
Thank you so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who came as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys enjoy the rest of your night.
Yeah, you too.
All right.
Too.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.